Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present a little bit more insights coming from Europe and, of course, from my past 3 years in Australia about how NBS can be a transformative opportunity for urban planning and the challenges ahead. For those online, I hope you enjoy the summit. Of course, I know that the blended format is for increasing inclusivity and make everything flexible for a larger audience. But I want to thank also the organizers and the city of Genk for being very hospitable and reminding us all the benefits of having in-site meetings. I'm currently as chair professor in urban and metropolitan planning and governance with Utrecht University. And my research on nature-based solutions is not a profession, I have to say, is a passion and determination for building better cities, and how we, coming from science, can actually be transformative agents and change agents to this. Diving into, I have 6 messages to bring today, and I will keep very close watch on my time. The first is to bring the messages clear of where the state of the art is and what we know. The last 3 messages I'm going to present is, okay, where do we go from now? And not only looking from the Connecting Nature project, but also across as a field of research and practice of nature-based solution. And my What Now messages, they come from sitting in Natura project, that is a global project of network of networks funded from the National Science Foundation of the United States, in which we do, and we have initiated global dialogues and also synthesis across the global knowledge base on interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity knowledge of NBS. So this is where I'm coming from, and a bit of a start teaser of what the presentation will be about. To start with, I want to make this very clear. We do have significant evidence, contextual, comparative, local, national, and global, about the efficacy of nature-based solutions as valid solutions to deal with many urban sustainability challenges. So when I have to say, I'm very critical when people come and say, oh, we don't have evidence on that. I'm like, read the literature. I understand that in some contexts, we really need to become more inclusive, especially geographically, and that there are a lot of cities and a lot of contexts that now are embarking into the research and into the practice of nature-based solutions. Yes, we still have lots of things to do, but we do have evidence, and we have a very prolific scientific community working inter and transdisciplinary that actually is building a very solid evidence base. Why we say so? Before I move to the next slide, in a current work we are doing with Natura project, we reviewed 260 reviews that they refer to urban nature-based solutions, that they span across a number of these urban challenges and co-benefits. If you even go and click about finding how many reviews of nature-based solution efficacy across flood protection, mental health, cardiovascular health, social cohesion, inclusion, give it a name, there is a vast knowledge there. So before going into criticizing that we still don't know X, let's step back and digest and learn from each other. We started back then, this picture is from 2014 and 15 actually, from Ioannina city, one of the cities of Connecting Nature, and with some initial formulation of what is nature-based solutions, how they can actually score and evaluate against grey infrastructure and more traditional conventional infrastructure. Many progress has been done since then. And in a recent published article, I don't see Gillian Dick here, but she also featured in New York Times about how the cities of Glasgow, the city of Melbourne, the city of New York have invested and actually mainstream protection of nature and bringing nature back in the city, either by regenerating urban parks, by appreciating interdisciplinary knowledge and creating policy and planning platforms for actually bringing nature-based solutions as a core projects and programs in the city. These pictures are from Melbourne, and the point of bringing it here we have solid evidence of how nature-based solutions work and in which context, is because it also entails the ecological knowledge of it. Whereas nature and nature-based solutions have been quite of a question, puzzling in the heads in city departments over the past years. This question, especially in Australia, is very prominent, not only because native trees and native plantations, they are back into the policy agenda, but also because of climate change. They already have the discussion and the impact and the measures and the results of how other types of nature, they don't fit the ecological climate, the climatic conditions of the continent. The same when we talk about where we derive this knowledge base. We derive it from an interdisciplinary collaboration. And practitioners like park rangers and ecologists, that they are the ones who maintain, who make sure that all the natural elements we introduce in the city, they are sustained over time, they are healthy. So they can create this habitat and the substantive element behind nature-based solutions for delivering multiple ecosystem services. My second message comes with the role of cities. And as an urban scientist myself, I cannot argue more that cities are the places and are also the change actors, the pioneers in employing nature-based solutions. And they do that by commitment to climate change and reversing biodiversity loss. After the 2019 summer, with all the bushfires in Australia, more than 100 cities declared climate emergency. You might say, okay, why is that so pioneering and so in city leadership? You need to put it in context. In Australia, like in other countries around the globe, there is not a supportive national framework on climate change action. There's no supportive climate change policy always in place. So cities pioneering, bringing these solutions with a clear climate agenda, with climate ambitions, declaring climate emergency, you might see it as an act of rebellion or as an act of really pioneering climate leadership. For doing this, I have to say, from evidence, from research, pivotal to this has been updating collaborative governance approaches. All the work on knowledge co-production, on co-creation, on games, on even bringing artificial intelligence, playful engagement, artistic involvement, it actually sits on a deep knowledge on how participatory planning and collaborative planning is happening in cities. It's just these are new methods of bringing it to the extra step. In the beginning of Connecting Nature, we did this policy needs assessment across the front-runner cities. Glasgow, Poznan, and Genk, they were our first learning grounds for us. In the published research that we have, you can see that collaboration, collaborative planning, how we engage with the unusual suspects have been identified more and more vocally as critical policy needs for implementing nature-based solutions. Reading the final deliverables of the project, you can see that all this collaboration between scientists, practitioners, and policymakers, planners of the cities, help to bridge this gap. The job is not done, it's always evolving, because the question, the needs of the city is always evolving. However, there are some bold steps there and a lot of knowledge to build upon. Going back to Australia is kind of like taking a flight from Europe to Australia constantly. I have to say the past 5 years it felt very much like this. We look with Cathy Oak, who had been you might say intermediary, in an intermediary role. She was a city councillor of the city of Melbourne and now with the University of Melbourne, working on cities, climate change and biodiversity. In a co-production approach, we came and said, okay, cities can address, they have the potential, the knowledge, and the leadership leveraging capacity to actually address biodiversity crisis. But for doing this, we need to build and strengthen what's already happening and what is already capacity that exists. As you see, the transdisciplinary research and the co-production collaborative approaches are really key messages and key findings from looking on cities in Oceania overall. And there is no lack of experience, there is no lack of diversity. This is also another aspect when we talk about how cities can pioneer and how they have shown what works on the grounds. Most of the times, and I think that comes dear to the heart of a lot of urban planners, they feel more happy to talk about urban parks. And that's because every city has them. They come with history, and they also create a large sense of place, belonging. And they're also the places where learning and experimentation can happen much more easily. They're not as contested as other places that they need to continuously transform from what it used to be to what it could be. However, in Australia, we saw that there is quite of a plethora of nature-based solutions being trialed, by showcased, considered landmark projects, very different across the different regions of the continent. And why I say continent is because Australia is a continent, is significantly large, and also has all the different climatic zones in one area. So from the very tropical Cairns, that is this end of the country, all the way to Victoria and Melbourne, that is situated here with a more Mediterranean, you might say, climate condition, even though very different, of course. We saw that there were a clear planning preference across different types of nature-based solutions. And the question became, we do have a lot of experience with on-site piloting medium-sized ones, but the moment we try to scale up, we start to face quite different challenges. And that brings me to the importance exactly of updating our collaborative governance approaches. This picture is outside my house in Melbourne, on the southern districts, and is on the 28th of October, where a storm started to unroot a lot of the trees. And it had blocked all the city across. I mean, this is just one of the main trees that they were sacrificed because of the wind. When I was talking to the City of Melbourne, Parker Rangers, and a number of other experts some days after, they start to even contest themselves of what's the reason of this happening. Health of root systems has been quite mentioned a lot, exactly because of wiring the city for internet connections, because of paving the ground over and over again, creating an unhealthy soil, because of the drought, infrequent irrigation patterns and water patterns. And also some of the trees that they fall down, they were not native. So a lot of these kind of knowledges come together, especially when you start seeing your nature being suffering or being, on the street, creating quite of a negative image when you try to implement a very ambitious metropolitan strategy on urban forestry. Aboriginal knowledge and local knowledge is also very important and something that cities can harvest and tap into bringing more capacity for transforming with nature-based solutions. In Europe, we look at it as local communities and local knowledge. But in other continents, in other geographies, the aspect of indigenous, native, Aboriginal knowledge is how it is being approached, conceptualized, but how it needs to be appreciated, approached, and the whole reciprocity and trust-building processes are significantly different. This is one of my lessons talking about cities' capacity to innovate and leadership to innovate with nature-based solutions cannot be done without acknowledging a pluralistic approach to knowledge systems. And that brings me to the third key message of what we already know. So if we are to better design, site, implement, manage, govern, all these processes are different. All these processes belong to a life cycle of a nature-based solution. If we even dare to say that stewardship and co-ownership might be one of the desirable governance outputs, we need to have systems thinking. For all these processes, system thinking is foundational. And I get increasingly frustrated with people not having systems thinking when they do any of those activities, from the evaluation all the way to designing, all the way to planning. I think this is a foundational knowledge, skill, and capacity that we should not forget and that we should continuously engage with, learn, and train ourselves and others. In a recent public work that we published with colleague Nadia Kabis and Rike Hansen, we looked across the literature of urban NBS and identified a set of principles, exactly stemming from, okay, we have lots of knowledge of nature-based solutions. What about the urban? What is distinct about urban nature-based solutions? It's not accidental that systemic understanding and systems knowledge is really central to all this. It is, you might say, the foundation. So why it is important to look and think from a systems perspective? It is because of this interconnectedness of all the different systems in the urban setting that make it important to understand feedback loops and how they interact. Otherwise, you create unnecessarily side effects or disservices that you are not considering. And it's not that if you have systems thinking, these services are not going to happen. But when you approach it from a systems thinking, you acknowledge and you prepare for these services. And then you can design and plan in a different way. Just not to be misunderstood that with systems thinking is a panacea and you're not going to create ecosystem disservices. In terms of how to do with speaking and looking in urban planning is about connecting tactical and strategic urban planning as a first approach of how this systems thinking can be actually instrumental. And you might say, okay, yes, but this can be turned into a very theoretical discussion. Maybe it's an academic exercise. Well, actually not. Because if you look from the strategic urban planning perspective, NBS have been proven and also can be a lens through which the different planners in different cities can integrate different programmatic initiatives, that they can look collaboratively into the socio-ecological and technological developments, drivers, but also initiatives and projects they initiate. And if you look closely, even on the governance innovations, you might again unpack and discover more potential into how we can govern our cities with new initiatives, with experimentation, with networks, with platforms. Looking on the urban forestry strategy of the city of Melbourne and all the actors that exerted agency in its governance and implementation, what we found is intermediaries, knowledge entrepreneurs, and also platforms, they played quite of an important role in collaborative governance of it. What these three have in common is the systems thinking to realize and recognize a new role for them across knowledge mediation and advocacy, but also into promoting, sustaining, and actually winning towards a transformative agenda for the city. And urban planning, even though there has been a lot of criticism, and in the recent IPCC report, if you read Working Group 3, Chapter 8, on cities, one of the main obstacles and barriers highlighted is urban planning. Urban planning has been traditional, resistant to change, and needs to change so as, to improve climate change adaptation and mitigation action in cities. But urban planning needs to be understood and operate with a different lens. With the evidence that we see across cities in Europe, in US, and across the globe, we see that in this collaboration between science, practice, and policy is where, you know, the whole transformative role of urban planning is put forward. So change is possible. Urban planning is important and an important missing link into governing and sustaining this momentum that we have with nature-based solutions in cities. And for this, again, we need to think of the city as a mosaic. And I think I come back to connecting nature and how all our digital identity is exactly about this mosaic of solutions and functions in our cities. And in this mosaic, you need also a plethora of different approaches and solutions, integrative, transformative, but also serving both people and nature, as also Sander Jacobs this morning introduced in his presentation. Now, so what? We have all this knowledge, we know what works, we know also where the challenges and impediments are. So what comes from now? The first message was also, I have to say, the big science innovation proposition of connecting nature is about connecting the dots. If we are to mainstream nature-based solutions in cities and don't lose the momentum, connecting nature and all the other projects, there is a large research portfolio within European Union on nature-based solutions across domains with different scopes and activities. We need to really find how to connect different forms of innovation, creating a more innovation momentum. Why we say that? There is again a mounting research and evidence of what can transform and what is the transformative potential and capacity of different people-based social innovation and nature-based projects and initiatives can bring to city. What I present here is from a large-scale review looking on the transformative capacity elements across the scholarship of nature-based solutions and social innovation, people-based solutions. Mapping them against a model urban planners use in Oceania and Southeast Asia, the IP model, that looks on, as you see, participatory planning, strategic planning, looking on implementation and design. So it is a large synthesis of the literature to speak to urban planners. So if we look on what are the messages we can bring for strategic and participatory planning, you can see very clearly that some of them, we of course have knowledge of how to do it. But bringing them together as a portfolio of a transformative agenda is what requires this connecting of different innovations. It's not looking critically on trade-offs between low-carbon innovations versus nature-based solutions versus social innovation. It's how we can connect them. And we do have this kind of more synthetic synthesis reports nowadays coming more and more exactly of connecting these dots. It's about time we bring also this thinking to the cities and to science. I don't know where to point. Building back from this, I know that COVID has been a major disruptor, of course has been portrayed a lot as a window of opportunity, but again, depending on where you're sitting, on your geography, it can also be seen as a missed window of opportunity. The picture on the left, it is from a Melbourne playground in a park during the lockdown. The city decided to red tape, literally, all playgrounds, making a lot of parks inaccessible. At the same time, there is a mounting evidence and science coming out to show that all people, regardless in which city they are, they use urban green spaces as oases for social encounter, for mitigating mental health issues and stress during the pandemic. How this now translates into more funding, into reappreciation of urban nature, it still needs to be foreseen, evaluated, and the so what question is still there. So one, of course, of the pending in progress is how we can harvest all the knowledge also from connecting nature into looking how these different innovations connected, and if so, in which way, and what's the message forward. My fifth message is again on mainstreaming and the importance of inclusive governance. And this issue of fairness, of justice, it is also something that comes again and again into play. And it's not just a philosophical discussion about justice. We can definitely have that one. But it's, what does it mean for our cities? When you talk about fair nature, just cities, just urban transitions, we need to take into consideration aspects of representation, intersectionality, human, non-human representation, as well as epistemological justice, whose knowledge systems are represented, considered in this policy science interface, and also how is this being done in a spatial context. Again, bringing back to the values and to the principles of designing urban NBS, inclusive solutions for the long term come hand in hand with systems thinking. In a very recent work published with a number of scholars, we unpack the aspect of inclusive governance of and with NBS, of existing nature and of installed, restored nature in cities. Some of the guiding questions to bring it to the cities have been also provided, and is a food for thought for all of us. But how do we bring this, that might be a very conceptual, operational discussion, into having more specific tools for urban planners? In research we did on injustice hotspots identification in the city of Melbourne, we took different ecological justice perspectives with knowledge on the context, operationalize it to provide a mapping of where are the injustices in the city. How can we systematically map and inform urban planners on that? And you can see the different layers up. You saw the more aggregated, like these areas require a closer examination of which type of investments, regeneration efforts for nature, where it is, for whom, for whose problems we are referring to. But at the same time, it is important to look on the fine-grained resolution of it. This work has been repeated for New York City, and also now is taking up a health injustice perspective as an additional layer, not to add analytical complexity, but also look of how does this relate with health deserts, with health inequalities. How can we bring this holistic systemic thinking into mapping this out across all capital cities in Australia? And my last message, being aware I have 3 more minutes, is about what we know. And that relates a lot with my first message. I started the talk today by saying we do have the knowledge and the evidence across different settings of the efficacy of nature-based solutions. So, but it's not that the job is done. We are still in progress and we need to not lose the momentum. So if we are to see a sustaining mainstreaming of nature-based solutions, we need to deepen and broaden the evidence base, but we do require critical synthesis of it and a critical interrogation. And for this, how to bring this into reality, it is important to further strengthening the evidence base. It's not only through grey literature, and I will encourage all the cities participating in any type of research and collaborative project, please make your reports available. Put them on websites, create ISBN numbers that can be citable. It's not necessary to have them in English language, even though a summary might be preferred. Academic community nowadays is multilingual and global. But then, even from a grey literature, from your experience, from your project report, we will all benefit, we will learn. The second is about disciplinary silos. We are an increasingly interdisciplinary academia. Let's continue doing this in a critical way, in an innovative way, not more of the same, but more of innovative ideas there. And co-produce and share knowledge globally, that is probably a global call to arms, to not just continue, but learn even from the experience with the COVID pandemic of how we can organize and co-produce at a global scale in a more productive way and sustainable way, and for us personally, and for the planet. I built it a lot from my experience in Melbourne over the past 3 years and my engagement with all the cities in Australia. I'm very happy to be back in Europe and very proud of what Connecting Nature has been accomplished over the years. The community of nature-based solutions research is large and evolving and increasing. And I would like to say that, yes, I feel very privileged to be one of the first ones in the community, and very happy to learn and see more innovative ideas and even innovative designs of NBS that hopefully in the future they will even challenge the existing typologies that we have, or even increase the evidence base. So don't stop innovate, and definitely keep in mind that in an era of the post-truth or the lack of trust in science, I think we need to build back this trust on how the scientific inquiry can really contribute by speaking truth to power in a very actionable and transformative way. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Niki. It was fantastic to have this wonderful summary or synthesis. And also, based on empirical research. I think it's for many people who maybe come later than you, it's great that there's people try to pull things together, because that's always a problem, that you get lost in all this literature. Okay, we have a small 15 minutes for discussion. So at first we'll give the audience and online, and then, if possible, I also have some own questions, but first I give priority to the audience. You have any questions?
It happens online, it happens in person, the awkward silence.
Thank you very much for this inspiring lecture, Niki. I'm really enjoying it. And I'm also struggling with the fourth point you made, like connecting innovations is so important for finding those integrated transformative solutions. But still, to give a practical advice to somebody working on it in practical, I cannot find the one sentence way to do it. Would you have it?
Yeah. Oh, thanks for this question. Okay, so many cities now come to my head, as examples, so try to find one. I will go to a European city and an Australian city just for the sake of it. So back when we were working in Resilient Europe project, before Connecting Nature, with the city of Katowice, one of the deprived areas of Zalesie Park was a very challenging context. We talk about the energy poverty to its max, old stock, post-war buildings, very drafty, some of them not even having windows anymore, with people burning garbage in barrels to heat the house. Okay, so that is the context, and very, very heartbreaking images from that. Open sewage infrastructure in the city. And of course, the area needed a regeneration, but in which direction? The access to the neighborhood park was blocked by a fence. But at the same time, a lot of social innovation initiatives, they were start realizing that they need to create and they need to empower a sense of community among the people. The city, at the same time, were a lot about climate adaptation, urban resilience, how we put this on the map, how do we look beyond, the city center and the Google Enterprise Park of Katowice city as a digital capital, and how do we make these more fair across different neighborhoods? One of the urban living lab experiments we did is about how do we connect all these things? How do we connect a city that wants to continue caring for this park, making it more accessible, how it can make it even more servicing towards the community, the social innovation that wanted, initiative that wanted to create this sense of place, belonging, community empowerment aspect, starting with children and women. And at the same time, like a lot of small enterprises talking about the food, small food initiatives to create some local employment. And one of the urban planners and city officers of the social domain in the city of Katowice actually created this cross-link across all these initiatives by simply putting a map and say, okay, here is an empty lot. Here there are some private but also public areas with a lot of apple trees. These two are unconnected because of a fence and, a very old way of how to enter the park and where the neighborhood is. If we remove this, we create more accessibility, and more connectivity across the two, then it might be a way not only for mobility and not this segregation, you might say, spatial segregation of the area, but also it can be a route for you, a place where you can locate your food stands or a local food market. This is what connected actually the dots. These were the area they did a big food festival on the park, but on the periphery of the neighborhood, start to create mobility in all the small, market shops and food shops and the community center and everything else in between, going from the backyard practically of the big opera house into, we bought this on this neighborhood. Let's walk through the park. It's just around the corner, and start to create, like this more movement around, this more recognition and uplifting of this stigma. Oh, this is just the backyard. Don't go there. There's nothing there exciting. So this is where it is connecting the dots about the different types of innovation. Going to Australia, completely different context. What I saw is about all these innovative approaches that Aboriginal communities brought about regenerating urban rivers, renaturing or rewilding cities, with how the city planners and engineers are looking at it. Of course, in cities in Australia, this is a very contested discussion, and it requires still the reconciliation to go between the two sides. However, for the city of Adelaide, for example, was one of the first cities to actually try and bring in more Aboriginal thinking of burning and fire as a way of restoring nature in cities and managing nature in cities in the capital city of Adelaide. So you might say an all socio-ecological, historical innovation with heritage, with all the aspects of Aboriginal knowledge and reciprocity to nature, came with a very innovative way of rethinking urban planning and how can we do this, being respectful to history, to the environment, and learning from, of course, the 2019 bushfires and the red summer or the black summer of Australia.
Yeah, thank you. That's nice examples of thinking out of the box. Are there other questions here in the audience? Yes.
Thank you, Niki. That was really great. Just going back to something that you touched on earlier in the presentation around the kind of the systems approach that we know is needed for delivering this, and the silos that exist. And I'm just wondering if you've had any reflections on the kind of skills and capacities that might be needed to bridge that and overcome those silos to move more towards systems thinking.
I will refer again to my research with 30 different cities, including the capital cities in Australia, that it is common across all these cities and the urban planning teams I spoke to, of how they approach this question of skill building for systems thinking. And they have let's say, two good practices. The first is to train and to engage, especially more senior people in the municipalities with scientific projects, like seeking collaboration with scientists, because they find in this way it's kind of a soft, if I may say, approach into opening up and thinking more holistically and systemically. But the other approach a lot of cities are doing is through recruitment. So when they open up positions for new people to join their teams, the urban planning teams, they really advertise on interdisciplinary positions. So they try to get the system thinkers that they have the training to be system thinkers into the city. So instead of going with a very traditional disciplinary, background of the people they hire now, they really and strategically, purposefully, they recruit people that they have this thinking as education. And I saw a number of advertisements, and I had this discussion with a number of cities, and they said, no, it's not accidental. We really thought that systems thinking, interdisciplinary, knowledge about sustainability and sustainable urbanization is extremely important for us. So we don't need to train and re-educate. We want someone that brings this updated knowledge now into our city and to be our new colleague and help us instead of, retraining us. So these are like two ways of being approached in a very pragmatic way.
Yeah, it just reminded me, some person in system thinking was telling me that only 10 or 20% of the population have this more system, holistic thinking tendency. So you cannot make from every person a system thinker, so that's also an important thing. Any other question? Just keep it. Yeah? Okay, I have one question from my side. You mentioned in your second point that it's important that cities have a commitment for climate change, adaptation or mitigation and biodiversity. I wonder, is that really essential? Because I can imagine perhaps if cities are motivated not so much by that, but more by health issues, security, reputation, even attracting knowledge business or something like that, that they can perhaps enter from a complete different type of motivation and maybe don't give a damn about biodiversity, but still are able at the end to make nature-based solutions. So I just wonder how, are there different entry points to come to nature-based solutions?
Yeah.
And then we close.
Okay. Try to give a short answer to this. You might say that the climate change adaptation need can be hidden and portrayed across different policy domains of cities. So you cannot talk about city branding, how bad it would be to brand a city as the most livable city, but then it gets flooded every 2 weeks. Or that you have power cuts because of severe overheating, of your energy infrastructure. So this kind of resilience of infrastructure, this you might say continuity of providing services for an urban population is something a lot of cities are striving for. It was, for a lot of years, cities, they were ignoring the aspect of climate change, but it's not to be ignored anymore. It has impacts across different infrastructures, even from the cybersecurity all the way to ICT, that now cities increasingly recognize. So even if they don't call it climate change, but it is as a driver or as a consideration of creating urban resilience, I think it is important to be in the mix when they formulate policy. More and more cities, they integrate climate change, adaptation and mitigation considerations across different ways. There is not all cities in Australia have a climate strategy, but most of them, they have a 3-canopy cover action plan, because that's how they immediately march into action, into responding to the climate change pressures after the bushfires in 2019. That's it. Thank you.